Hello Spark fans, and welcome back to Advancing Spark, where I am once again running late on the Databricks news roundup of what happened in the month of April 2022. I know it's the 10th of May already. Oh, so late. I've been traveling, clients. The world is opening up again. It's kind of mad. So there isn't a huge amount to talk about, really, in terms of major platform releases. We do have a new runtime to look at, so we'll do a little bit of both together. And there's one or two sneaky things that have come out just as I'm putting this video out. So we'll take a little look at what that is as well. So yeah, we're going to talk April 2022 Azure Databricks platform release notes. We're going to talk Databricks Runtime 10.5, which is now GA. And we'll have a little bit of a look at Databricks Workflows, which seems to be a new thing. Or is it? We'll find out. As always, if you're new around here, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know down in the comments how you're getting on with it. Are you already using 10.5? How are you finding the new SQL features? Loads of questions. We will go through it. Until then, let's have a look at what we've got in the release notes. As always, I am over on the Azure release notes. Make that a little bit easier to see. Let's get a bit more space. And I've got the April 2022 release notes. I'm going to put them right down to the bottom. And we'll go from bottom up and just talk about what some of these things are doing. Number one, Delta Live Tables. Now, DLT, Delta Live Tables, went GA last month. So these are now production grade. Use it in anger, go nuts, and have a play with Delta Live Tables. And so, as always, they've decided to rename a thing the month after it goes live. Why wouldn't you? It's only a tiny thing, honestly. So what used to be called incremental tables are now called streaming tables. So if you had an incremental live table, essentially that meant it streamed the data into it. That confused everybody. And so they've just renamed incremental live tables to streaming live tables. All makes sense. Gonna see streaming coming in, but for now you can still use incremental as the keyword and that'll still work, but that's gonna be deprecated over time. So we're gonna have to change some of our syntax, but for now, if you're using incremental, still use incremental, it's fine. Just be prepared at some point to change it. And complete live tables are just now known as live tables. It's either a live table or it's a streaming live table. Kind of the same way as it's a Spark query or it's a streaming Spark query. Same thing. But now we've got those two bits of semantic. Streaming live tables no longer got the idea of it's either a complete live table or an incremental live table. That's all it is. Not a breaking change. Nothing's going to stop working. Just be aware. Future updates for DLT, you'll see that terminology, and you're likely to see the incremental keyword get deprecated in future releases, but it's not gone yet. Cool. Change number two. Well, DLT is GA. There we go. Just already announced that. Spoiled my next release. But yeah, Delta Live Tables is now generally available in AWS and Azure. It's in public preview in GCP. So you can use it in all three, but be aware it is public preview only in GCP. It's not GA yet. And I did a whole video. If you don't know what Delta Live Tables is, go watch the videos. Talk about it lots. Next, we've got data sets from Unity Catalog with Automl. So Unity Catalog is the new data governance, data catalog, the whole map of all the data you've got across all of your different Databricks workspaces. We've got that now in public preview, the video coming soon. And now you can actually say, well, actually, I want to use that data set from Unity Catalog. So essentially, you can use it. It's kind of like a super mega extended Hive metastore, and you can say, well, I want to use that data set from Unity Catalog and plug it into AutoML and use it as a nice single holistic view of all your data sets across all your Databricks workspaces, and that just makes sense. So great feature, and we'll see that. We'll be having to play with that once we've got Unity Catalog available to demo. Okay, Databricks AutoML is GA. I mean, we've done some videos about Databricks AutoML recently. Again, been going around for a long time, and it's great to see it finally reach GA status. And there's more stuff appearing into it, which is cool. So lots of definitely want to keep a good eye on Databricks AutoML. Okay, Delta Live Tables UI has been updated. So they introduced a permissions model in previous releases. So it used to be you've either got access to Delta Live Tables or you don't. And I went, you know what? Actually, sometimes people need to go in and monitor it and see how it ran. But they're not allowed to configure it. They can't change the cluster. They can't add new settings. And so they introduced a permissions model. So you can see different things. You can view. I can go and look at it, but I can't change it. Can edit, that kind of thing. But the button still worked. Or they didn't work. You could click a button and then it'd think about it and it'd give you an error. And it was just not really a nice user experience. This change is real simple. If you don't have access to do a thing, the button will be grayed out and won't work anymore. Simple as that. Basic UI change, but it'll just make it a little bit less confusing. People won't see all these buttons and click it and get an error, which is just a slightly jarring user experience. That's nicer. Databricks Runtime 10.5 went beta last month. We do have it in GA now, and we'll talk about that after we've gone through the platform changes. So that's something we can have a look at. There's a slight bug. If you're playing around in the jobs UI and you're associated to a cluster, and then that cluster disappeared because you'd either deleted it or you hadn't pinned that cluster, and it'd been 30 days since it ran and disappeared. Yeah, you couldn't change anything, so it's kind of just broken. Whereas now you can go in, if there's a job that has been orphaned because the cluster no longer exists, you can just go and fix it. Makes sense. Easy. All good. The history for job tasks. There's a much better view history for that. We'll come on to that in a second because that's baked into this whole idea of Databricks Workflows. And there's a new matrix view to see how the job ran, but actually all how the tasks inside that job ran, and look at the overall history of it. So we'll take a look at actually what that looks like in a second. And there's this other idea of repairing a workflow. So if you were running through a particular job and it broke at a certain task, so if you're doing 5 tasks and the 3rd task in failed, and then you go in and you fix a setting, you don't have to rerun the entire thing if that was doing a huge amount of work at the start of it. So it's the idea that you can now rerun from a failure, which is quite nice. So it doesn't rerun the things I've already run. It starts off where it left off, and it'll then carry on with any downstream tasks that relied upon that job that's being rerun. Fairly basic thing in orchestration tools, but again, it's good to see what we see as Databricks jobs slowly getting a bit of maturity, slowly becoming a slightly better orchestration tool, getting some of the features that we expect. So run and repair, or repair and run. Little thing we'll talk about a little bit more later when we talk about Databricks Workflows, but it's just a nice feature just to make them a little bit more reusable. Okay. And again, yes, that's the thing I mentioned to do with the job history. We've got this idea of the jobs matrix. Again, skip to that at the end when we talk about Databricks Workflows. It's just that idea of here's all the different job runs I had, and here's a little red or green thing for all the different tasks in that job. What ran, what didn't run. So rather than just getting the whole thing worked or the whole thing broke, we get this breakdown of, is there a task that always breaks within that workflow? Can we get down to the detail but see it as a single screen? That's what that job matrix is all about. Okay, scary one. Databricks Runtime 10 series support ends. We've reached that point 6 months after release. The Databricks Runtime 10.0 is no longer supported. Again, the big thing is we've got 10.4 as the LTS. So we have a long-term support option. So if you're terrified by the idea of how fast the cadence of the different Databricks release time, Databricks Runtime releases are, again, you do have the long-term support, the LTS versions, just in case that is a terrifying prospect. Tags. So in Databricks jobs, if you've suddenly found yourself with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Databricks jobs, and you need to be able to easily search them, and the naming convention is not enough, you can now tag things. You can tag things as different owners, different workflows, different kinds of jobs, and you can use that for searchability and be able to dig into it. And you can also understand your job clusters from that. And that is a really important piece for me. So if you are using Azure billing and you're looking at how much things are costing, then putting tags on your clusters means that you can actually understand that a bit more. If you're tagging all of your jobs, and that's going to propagate down to your job clusters, it means you can tag a job and manage it that way. The tag gets propagated down to your cluster, and then you're in your Azure billing, you'll be able to see your tags. So actually say, well, job clusters for this group of tasks, me this much. Job clusters for this different group of tasks, me this much. So you can manage your costs better because of that tag propagation, and that's just cool. A nice thing that we've got to be able to organize jobs better. Again, it's adding new features to Databricks jobs just to make them a little bit more mature as an orchestration option for managing your Databricks workflows. Oh, Databricks workflows, coming to that, don't worry. Finally, we got this new Azure region. So the Sweden Central region in Azure, you can now deploy Databricks to. You couldn't previously. So if you're in Sweden Central, you can now go nuts and build a local Databricks environment rather than having to use one of the generic EU, Northwest, etc. And that is it. So, not crazy. Little incremental changes to jobs. few other quality of life, not a lot of stuff actually seeing in April. Now that's a little bit misleading because kind of got the private preview or the gated public preview of Unity Catalog and Delta sharing dwarfing a lot of that, plus the GA of Automl and of Delta Live Tables. There are some massive, massive, massive announcements that are happening there. They've been around in preview for a while, been hearing about them lurking behind the scenes for a little while, which is why the fanfare maybe seems a little like, yeah, they've been around for a while, but actually a huge amount of changes in terms of being able to use those things in anger. Okay, so Runtime 10.5. So came in during May. It's now gone GA, so we can now use it in anger. What is going on inside this new runtime? Have a look. So there's some secretly bits. So there's a whole host of changes to the SQL, the Spark SQL layer. Real simple one. Seal, ceiling, and floor functions have now got the ability to specify a scale. It used to be if you said ceiling, you just bring it up to the nearest integer. If you want to say ceiling to a certain 2 decimal places, and it'll bring it to that. So it's essentially kind of using it as a little bit more accurate. So ceiling, and floor, you have now got an element of accuracy, or actually the target scale. You can now pass as additional parameter, just to have a bit more fine-tuned control about it. Nice, easy. An optional argument, so you don't have to go and change all your code. It'll work as it did, but again, you can add that in if you need to. We've got new aggregation functions specifically for doing things around linear regression. So we've now got that regression average X, regression average Y, depending on which side of the scale you're going on, which allows you to then do linear regression style aggregates. I've not had a play with it yet. Kind of cool that we've got that now built in at the SQL layer. We can have a play, we can kind of see how that works. Generally works across groups because you need a tuple to be able to actually work out a spot to do regression on it. But yeah, interesting to kind of have that baked in. So we'll be having a play with those two soon and just seeing how we can build those into some of our workflows. Very data science if we're talking about regression, but actually tons and tons of different use cases for things that we do. Stuff. Contains, starts with, and ends with. All used to be things that we could only run on a string data type. You can say, does this string contain this other string? A true or false. Does this start with a substring? True or false. Those things we could only previously run on strings, we can now run it on binary data types. So rather than just do a string, if you've got a gigantic blob, you can now actually run that on there as well and just do the same functionality. It's just expanding the functionality. You now use it across different data types. You don't have to do an awkward cast of your binaries into strings to be able to run these things on them. Otherwise, get nulls back and all that stuff. Again, nice little usable stuff. Got a new array size function. So if you want to work out the length of an array, that's actually quite useful. So anytime you're dealing with complex object and you've got some kind of little array of child objects that's nested inside your data frame, you can now have a dig and have a play and do some logic going, does this have anything in my array? You can bundle that up with things like you've got collect list and collect set, which take a load of strings across things, bundle it up, use it as a window function, and then you can run things like that saying, did this window function return any results that will bundle into the array? If not, you can do something else. So yeah, lots of interesting things we can do with that. Just gives a little bit more functional programming power in the SQL side of things. Okay, there's a Unity Catalog one. Now I don't know too much about Unity Catalog. I've just got access. I now have access. But I haven't actually built out the demo yet. And there's a video coming soon, but I've not done it yet. So looking at this, so it's looking at when you're digging in, when you're querying the Unity Catalog. So you can bring back some metadata. And now you can instead, rather than have an extra flag, you now just get a different indicator in terms of the path to see that it is or isn't, which fits into how existing functions work. They've implemented it one way, they've changed how that's implemented. Most people who aren't yet using the preview of Unity Catalog will have no concept of what that actually means or why we care. All it is, when you bring back a list of directories, it's now more like how the dbutils.fs.ls works. That's it. But by the time everyone has access to it, you look at it and go, yeah, that works how I expect it to work. Cool, fine, good. Autoloader. So file notification support, that's when we're using the cloud provider to tell us there's a file there using some kind of queuing system. That's now gone GA for GCP. So in Google, there are like sort of the Azure equivalent of Event Grid and notification queues. The Google version of that is now GA. If you're trying to do that across a Google Cloud source, this is the Azure release notes, but you might be using Autoloader in Windows, in Azure, and doing it against a GCP cloud source. So there's various different reasons why that comes through. But again, you can now use that. Delta, interesting one in Delta. You've now got a max records per file option when you're writing. So you can actually say, well, actually, I don't want any more than 1 million records in each Parquet file that's created for this Delta table. Or no more than 10 million, no more than 40 million. And you can kind of pick a ceiling going, actually, this is the maximum number of records I want in a given file. So it's a little bit like when we talk about things like optimized writes. So we're doing auto-optimize and we're telling Spark, actually try and arrange for the files to be about this size. So now we're switching it and saying, no, this should be aimed for this number of records per file. If it's going to write out and this gets to that number, it'll split it out into separate files instead. You can now have a play and do that if there's certain reasons why you want to limit the number of rows going into a certain thing. Maybe you're sending those files off and you're reading it by something else, and that has a file limit, a record limit in terms of how many things it can see in a certain file. I don't know why you're doing it, but you've now got the ability to do it. Koalas. So Koalas is now officially deprecated. So loads and loads and loads of data science people, loads of traditional Python-y people use pandas. Pandas gives you data frame-esque abilities in local Python. Very, very, very well adopted outside of the Spark ecosystem. Koalas was introduced as essentially trying to provide feature parity, or as much feature parity as possible, so that people could take their existing pandas workloads, all the data frames, reading stuff, bring it over and just run it straight on Spark. And that's what Koalas was. And now since Spark 3.2, they've brought in the pandas API, so you can just run straight pandas on it. So you can import PySpark.pandas and as PS, PD, however you want to do it, and then just run all of your code like that. So there's now a bit of a change. So a load of people who were using Koalas, because that was the only way to get pandas to actually scale, now need to switch over and use pandas, and has been since Spark 3.2. And now they're officially saying we're no longer going to pre-install Koalas on the Databricks runtime. So it's installed on Databricks 10.5. If you're using Koalas, this is your final warning of them going, we'll still let you. You can still do it in 10.5, but from 10.6 or whatever runtime is next, you're not going to have Koalas pre-installed. You should start using the PySpark pandas library, which is Spark native, is Spark scalable, and it's the newer version of what was Koalas. But just be aware, if you're still using Koalas all through your code, you need to stop using it after this runtime. That is all about. Again, they've got the example. Do I have the example open? Let's get the example open. The main difference is, rather than importing Databricks.koalas, which was pre-installed, will no longer be pre-installed after 10.5. Instead, you just import PySpark.pandas. And there's a change where if you're using the 2 koalas, that needs to change to 2 pandas. That's basically it. That's the big, scary change you need to worry about after 10.5. That is going to be a change you need to keep an eye out for. It's a very fancy thing. So there's a new metadata hidden column. There are certain hidden columns in a Spark data frame, and you might have come across ones like corrupt record. And if you expose that, so if when you are providing a schema to a data frame, or when you add a column to a data frame, if you expose this hidden system column, you get some hidden system information. So if you're using things like _corrupt_record, and then you're trying to apply a schema to a schema on read style file, such as a CSV, then it will actually, in corrupt record, it will tell you the original values that failed that structural parsing. _metadata gives you information about the file that each record came from. So like for me, when I'm doing ETL, all the time, as most data coming into a lake, I will automatically just append a column, use input file name as the PySpark function, and just append a column which tells you what the file name is. This is actually saying, we no longer need to do that. Now, when I'm bringing my data in, I can just say expose the _metadata column, and that's going to give us a load of file metadata for each record, which looks like this. Okay, we get the file path, the file name, the file size, and the file modification date. So if we're bringing in and we're reading a load of flat files, if you're reading a folder structure that has 1,000 flat files in it, you can automatically tag each individual record. This record came from that file, this record came from that file, this record came from that file. Here's the modification dates. This is when they changed. Oh, that was a new file that was added and overwritten. Just useful stuff that a lot of the time we do this stuff manually. We append this stuff back onto the data frame by calling a load of functions. Just nice, we can now automatically expose it as a little struct with those 4 attributes and maybe some future attributes in the future. We'll see. But certainly just a nice little thing. It warms my cold, dead engineering heart that we can just automatically append file source metadata into it. Now, it's one of those things, only really works when you're reading from files. As soon as you're into a Delta table, does it really make any sense? The kind of thing you would use when you're first ingesting data into your structured lake. When you're applying it, putting it into a Delta table, you'd want to run this, append that, and then just carry that same metadata column through later stages of curation. Super, super useful that we've got that in the early parts, or certainly anytime we're doing experimentation over flat files. Finally, the Delta Live Tables has a little switch. We can say, I want to use the preview mode. Show me the latest stuff. I want to test this out using the latest features and functions. With this change, you can now, if you say, I want to use preview in Delta Live Tables, it'll be using 10.5. You have a channel, a little channel switch, turn preview on. That is going to change Delta Live Tables to use 10.5, and then you can play with some of these functionalities. You can bring in some of these SQL references, you can expose metadata, and all of that good stuff. And then there's bugs and libraries and normal Databricks runtime things. As always, do take a look through it yourself. Make sure you have a look through the library support. There shouldn't be any breaking changes in there. The koala stuff is not going away until next release. But as always, if you're relying on a load of libraries, and assuming there's a certain version of libraries in that runtime, do always check that payload of libraries that are pre-installed, just in case. Just in case something you're relying has changed version and it breaks other things, go and have a look. Okay, so that's our release changes. So we've got some platform things, a lot of things around jobs, Databricks jobs changes going on, and 10.5 with some nice SQL bits and pieces, bits of support, and a nice little metadata column. Now, then there was a new thing. So I spotted this just as I was getting ready to do the video. As I was pulling things together, I saw it getting announced on LinkedIn as introducing Databricks Workflows. I was like, well, that sounds interesting. Sounds different. Sounds weird. Now, taking a look through, again, I've literally just had a skim. It does appear to be a fancy rename of Databricks jobs. But it's kind of taking all the good effort that's gone in. All of the multi-step jobs, all of this slow incremental changes they've been making to jobs, actually now and say, you know what, it's now a bit more than just Databricks jobs. Databricks jobs are very simple CRUD operations. At this point in time, run this task. There's a little bundle, a little payload of features that we've had over the last month or two, allowing us to do multi-steps, allowing us to restart from a given point if it broke, allowing us to better track the history of all this little chain of job executions, allowing us to use Databricks jobs to kick off actually a wider array of different types of things, not just notebooks. And it seems like that whole collection of changes is being branded as Databricks Workflows. You'll see workflows start to appear. Now, this is the thing I mentioned earlier when we're talking about that idea of I've got multiple executions of a job. So going along that x-axis is each daily execution. Each day I'm running my Databricks job. And then you can see in terms of those different tasks, so build features, clicks ingest, match, orders ingest. These are different steps. These are different tasks in my workflow. And you can see that each one succeeded. You can see there was one day when most of my jobs failed, probably because 2 failed. The downstream ones were skipped because it didn't get to them because of those 2 failures earlier upstream. We see one thing just worked. Orders ingest didn't have any dependencies on those other things, and that worked quite happily. So getting that real high-level visual of all my executions, these things were chained together, that step broke, and it affected those things. Actually a really nice way to see things. So there's some nice parts that are in there in terms of this whole idea. It still doesn't seem to be anything amazingly new. It's just a bundle of those features, those upgrades to Databricks jobs. Again, there is also information about the idea of repair and rerun. That's that same idea where we had things where something broke and then the downstream jobs didn't run because they depended on those earlier things that have failed. And it's allowing us to then go in, fix a particular thing, repair and rerun. So So we can rerun from a failed execution, and then it'll run everything that went downstairs. So you can do repair run, go and fix it, and it'll run everything that failed, and then everything that is now unblocked downstream after fixing that failure. So lots of interesting things in there. I'll be having a bit of a deeper dig in to see if there is anything else that's new in here. For me, it's still not quite there. So certainly for me, in terms of building a reference architecture, I still use Data Factory. So I use Data Factory to run over a loop of rules. Go get some metadata, bring back a list of stuff to do, go and bring each of those things into my blob storage, get it into my Azure ecosystem. I then use Autoloader to load from the files that have been landed. But that's the second step in my orchestration, right? The second thing that happens is my Databricks style workflow kicks off. Well, I want Autoloader. I want to kick that off for a number of jobs. Now that could be 1, could be 10, could be 100, and I want that metadata driven. And the thing that we still can't quite do yet, maybe via Delta Live tables, is I want to run this notebook in my Databricks workflow. I want to run this notebook 10 times with these different parameters. I want to do it for each loop. And that's a key thing for me in terms of an orchestration tool, is to have dynamic orchestration. We're still not quite there in terms of how Databricks workflows are working, but then I can kick off a Delta Live table load, and Delta Live table, I can parameterize inside and say, do these 100 things. So actually, maybe it's a mix. Maybe it's a bit of a shift of where we do parameterization, where we do metadata-driven things. It's a bit of a challenge going, no, actually, it's just slightly different. We're changing how the different layers are responsible for different things. And maybe that's fine. But essentially, haven't quite gone through and worked out how this works in a truly modern, flexible world. There are other pieces, as we say, the things that we can orchestrate in here. There's a nice big list. It's growing and growing and growing. I just lost it. So we can do notebooks. We can do SQL. We can do Spark. So we can submit a Spark job. We can retrain and publish ML models. And we can do DBT. It's interesting that we kind of got this growing collection of things that we can orchestrate, that we can kick off using Databricks workflows. Need to get used to calling it Databricks workflows, not Databricks jobs. Now, as I said, I might have missed something here. There might be something way, way, way deeper, and I'm getting the wrong end of the stick by looking at this and going, that's just jobs. But for now, doesn't seem like anything crazy, but it is just an acknowledgement of the advancement that's happened to jobs and how different they are than they used to be for doing different things. So, yeah, interesting stuff. Will I be adopting them? Not until I can reach into an internal, very networked network and reliably transfer files via this without having to do some horrendous networking. I'll still need some kind of other external orchestrator to do cross-cloud communication. But soon, very soon, it will be able to do it. And so it's a good thing to keep an eye on. Right, I'm going to stop rambling. That is all the news I have across the month of April and the very start of May. And yeah, some interesting stuff. Not a huge, crazy new announcement of mad feature things that are coming down the line, but actually just the GA of a load of things that have been knocking around for a while. The reaching public preview of a load of things that we've all been waiting for. And the step evolution of a load of tools that have been in there for a while. And a metadata column that just makes me really happy. Shouldn't make me that happy, it just doesn't make me, it should make me happy, I like it. Cool. So, as always, do not forget to like and subscribe, and let me know down in the comments if there's something I've glossed over. If there's something I pointed out and went, yeah, well, that's a thing, and you're like, no, that is big, you should be paying attention to that. Let me know if I've misunderstood Databricks Workflows, and you're like reading the blogs going, oh no, there's more in there. As always, happy to have a chat. Let me know down in the comments, and I'll grab you at the next video. Cheers.